Another call that they had made leading up to the draft was to the Los Angeles Clippers, talking to the Clippers about a potential Paul George deal. I have no idea if the Clippers are open to moving Paul George. Been several reports about them gauging the market for Paul George ahead of this draft. I'd be surprised if they traded him. Tim, I'm wondering your read on that situation with the Clippers.
I think if you look at around the league, and there were a lot of teams that had similar expectations for how last season was going to go, right? The NBA was as wide open as we've ever seen. Arguably going into the playoffs, there were a lot of teams that thought they had chances to win. We obviously saw the Lakers and the Heat become the first teams to advance in the playoffs after being in the play-in tournament. We saw them both make it to the conference finals and finals respectively. And that sort of summed up to me how wide open the league was. And when you have such a wide open league that with a lot of teams with similar expectations and obviously only a couple that can actually fulfill them, what does that lead to? It leads to a lot of disappointment. And when there's a lot of disappointment, that leads to a lot of change. I mean, you saw the Celtics this week made a pretty massive trade, moving on from Marcus Smart, going to get Kristaps Porzingis, completely changing the makeup of their franchise in a lot of ways, right? And you saw the Suns go trade everything for Bradley Beal in a similar move to try to get to where they want to go. And I think that's a long-winded way of saying, I think when you look at where the Clippers have been the past several years and the disappointment they've had and the inability they've had to have their guys on the court and healthy, I think it's natural to look at their situation and say they're going to be looking around at options. And remember, they were in the mix on potentially getting Malcolm Brogdon earlier this week. Before those trade talks fell apart. So, they, I think, are going to be active in trying to look to change their team around, and we'll see what that looks like. But I do think if you look across the wider lens of the league, I think you're seeing a lot of activity and a lot of teams hunting around to do something, because I think the general feeling of discontent and disappointment about failed expectations really is one that's pretty pervasive across the league after how wide open things have been.
Right. And John, just taking out of the equation for a second, whether it could or couldn't happen, Paul George to the Knicks, how do you see it? Do you like it as a fan, adding that kind of player? And you can add in a hypothetical of what you'd have to give up to bring him in if you want to.
Yeah, I mean, look, I know a lot of fans see the age, see the injuries over the last several years, and certainly look ahead to the next contract and say, absolutely not, it makes no sense given the Knicks timeline. Well, I think that's a little silly, given that George is, I think, basketball-wise, about as perfect of a fit as you're going to get between Jalen Brunson and Julius Randle, to the point where if you could get him for, Evan Fournier and they pick up Rose's team option and, maybe like an Obi Toppin and a couple of protected picks, well, of course you're going to do that. Now, as Tim just noted, the Clippers are obviously not going to do that. And I think the position the Clippers are in is fascinating because we see all these teams around the league dealing with these financial issues. Where the Clippers are at, though, is in this unique place where I think you could argue they still have a championship ceiling, but they also have, they're getting up to it waist high with these financial issues. They have a chance to get out of it there. And, re-signing Paul George, which Paul George is going to look for an extension this summer, it's like someone's giving him a shovel to dig even deeper. So what are your goals as an organization? Are you trying to, make a trade that gets you younger and maybe you're not, you lose some championship equity, but you're still good? Like, if that's the case, like, would they listen to something built around RJ Barrett and Emmanuel Quickley, for instance, just saying, where the Knicks are not giving up their own draft equity? I don't know. Again, it comes down to what the Clippers want out of, the next year, the next 2 years. But like, again, just to shut it down as a possibility for the Knicks, I think that to me is going a little bit too far.
Yeah, I do know that there are Clippers over there. There are some fans of RJ Barrett, but when I think about this in the big picture sense, I mean, Tyronn Lue, top head coach, entering his final year on his current contract. They've spent a ton of money already. Steve Ballmer wants to win a title. So I would assume any Paul George trade, they're not going to pull the trigger unless you're getting back a player or players who can help you compete for a title today. Can the Knicks offer that? I mean, it's up for debate, but I don't know if the Clippers would look at some of these Knicks players and say, yes, that guy is going to help me conference finals, help me get through with Kawhi Leonard and the rest of the group. So that's why, it just doesn't seem super likely to me. Knicks have checked in. I would assume if the Clippers continue to signal that Paul might be available, I would assume that the Knicks continue to check in there because obviously he'd be a fantastic addition.